Crystal Palace.
Talking
love
about
them so
dressing room
much.
harmony and good vibes.
What a win. And I have to, so if you watched last episode, I tipped Man City because anyone with a brain would have tipped Man City. And you guys know my track record. I have to play FIFA to get points now. Not good. I backed Norwich for a while, Aston Villa for a while, get no love. And so when in my brain, I promise you that when I saw Man City Crystal Palace, I went, I want to go for Crystal Palace. But then I looked at you in that chair, 5-0 up or whatever it is, and I went, I'm an idiot. I'm sitting in this wooden chair. I'm going for Man City. And goals from Wilfried Zaha and was it Edouard? Conor Gallagher.
Conor Gallagher, yeah.
Conor Gallagher gave him 2-0 win. And I'm just fuming that I didn't.
The commentator did mix up Zaha and Edouard, which was a bit awkward.
Yeah, I like how he just did not.
didn't address it.
Yeah, didn't address it. And, it's a great goal by Edouard. And Zaha wheels away.
It's always a horrible moment as a commentator when you realise
it happens. It happens. But let me reel off some stats from that game because I think this is important to note. They did win 2-0. Laporte got sent off, obviously, just before half-time. But shot attempts is where it gets interesting. 14 shots for Man City, 8 for Crystal Palace. 3 on target each. So before we give Crystal Palace their dues, is this going back to the fact that there is still no recognised striker? They were meant to sign Harry Kane. That didn't come to fruition. Is that the biggest flaw in Man City's title charge?
Well, if you are a nerd like me and look at things like expected points tables based on XG match to match.
Yeah. Didn't know Graham Potter was part of this podcast.
Brighton actually outperforming their XG this season.
Great.
Amazing.
Great.
Amazing how the tables turn.
Yeah.
But Man City should be top of the table. So I think you can connect that to the fact that they don't have a proper striker to finish off the chances that they're creating. And of course, on the other end, I think you might have to question the work of Edison this season. Didn't love his work on the opening goal.
No.
He's rated up there as one of the best keepers in the competition. He's always sweeping off his line. He's amazing distribution of the ball. But the actual... I would love to see some stats on the shots that he's letting in.
Yeah.
Because I think he's having a bit of a dip at the moment. That's costing them on the other end. When the XG doesn't line up, you usually look at the opposite two ends of the team.
Yeah.
And sometimes this is bad luck.
Yeah.
But I think you're right. Not having a striker doesn't do them any favours in this situation. I also found it really interesting on the first goal, watching the way that Crystal Palace actually set up to defend the first phase of possession.
Yeah.
Meaning when the centre-backs have the ball.
Yeah.
So if you look at it, they're set up in a 4-4-1-1, but instead of sitting off goal side on the Manchester City central midfielders being Silva and De Bruyne, I believe.
Yeah.
They were actually fronting them. So they were standing in front of the two number 8s and preventing them from receiving the ball in the first place rather than trying to defend them once they do.
Yeah.
And the back four was playing really high, which is not something we've seen Crystal Palace do very often. And the strikers weren't pressing the centre-backs so much, but they were just staying really compact in the middle of the field and trying to stop City from playing through into the midfield area. Because once you do that, then you're quite exposed because the defence is so far up the pitch.
Yeah.
And they did a really good job of actually retreating and backing off to the edge of their own penalty area and defending in a more conventional way once that pass actually got through. But the way they scored that first goal is Laporte had no options to pass to.
And just got pressed.
Yeah, and he made a mistake and lost it, but it's not necessarily Laporte's fault. It's the midfield being a little bit too static, and I think that also comes from Guardiola's all-encompassing system, which he has a fancy name for. I think it's called Jogador de Position or something.
It's not the Johan Cruyff accordion.
Yeah, well, it's inspired by it, which is basically just positional play.
Yeah. You are on the Spanish today.
Yeah, really. Basically, he divides the pitch up into a grid of 20-something boxes on the field. Instead of having, this is the centre of midfield, these are the wings. He's got the half spaces and then, it's basically a chessboard, he sees the pitch as. And he's got a very well-defined system that he drills into the players over and over and over again. When the ball is here, these players are in these positions. And you always have these exact options all over the pitch.
To go to,
And I think that's great for giving the team an idea of how to play. But if you're too rigid about how you implement that, it becomes too predictable.
Yeah.
And you end up with opponents having seen you play this way for many years and being able to prepare.
Yeah.
You end up being able to predict exactly what City are going to do with the ball. And given that they've got so many individually creative players in the squad, you think having a little bit more individual freedom to decide and make those choices and play outside of the structure would help them a little bit in these situations when you're coming up against a really well-drilled opponent. So I think that was exactly what was on display in the first phase of the build-up. Crystal Palace said, we know exactly where the central midfielders are going to be. We're going to play in front of them and play really aggressively there so that we can prevent them from advancing the ball up the pitch. Because once they do, they will hem you in and eventually they'll score. So it was a really interesting game tactically. In terms of the actual chances created, it was a very boring game. It wasn't a West Ham end-to-end affair. But I think Patrick Vieira deserves immense credit for how well he prepared this team for this specific game.
And some of those players have been having stellar seasons, right? I mean, you don't have to mention Wilfred Zaha, who God knows how he's still at Crystal Palace, really. Conor Gallagher, who...
Prohibitive price tag and a club that can afford to... pay him pretty handsomely to be the star player.
Yeah.
And this is what we were talking about last week in terms of the salary cap. Crystal Palace, having had many seasons in the Premier League and been the beneficiary of all of that accrued TV money across they're able to attract a guy like Wilf Zaha and keep him. And that's good for the league, I think, because in any other league, he would have gone to one of the Champions League clubs. Exactly. He would have been hoovered up and become part of another cog in the machine at City, sitting on the bench, for example.
And now, obviously, the star man leading the line with plentiful young attacking options. Conor Gallagher, Eze, Olise, Odson Edouard, even Christian Benteke is getting back in amongst the goals. Your boy Steve Parish is running that club really, really well.
Something about those parishes.
I think he has double R in that one, so you can't really claim relation.
They're also very good at scouting the championship.
Which is
Eze,
where
Olise came from as well. Basically signing the outstanding young player in the championship as often as possible. And that's just good business. And they seem to have a pretty cohesive dressing room culture as well, because they've actually got quite a lot of English players. Which isn't usually the norm across the Premier League these days.
Not often. And so with that result, though, where do you think that leaves them? Do you think they're dynamic enough to kind of get on a bit of a run now and have the tactical nous to then adapt, against all the other opposition? Or was this more of a flash in a pan thing and they might still struggle?
I think they are better set up at the moment to play against bigger teams. That's something I've noticed. That Spurs result they had, they've tested a lot of the
Arsenal
top six. Exactly. So I think they're better in transition. They're better as a team that is reactive and sets up in response to what the opposition is going to do. And when they have to take the initiative and be the team in possession, a proactive team, they're not quite as well set up to play that way. So they end up running into a brick wall. So that's what's going to hold them back. I see them finishing mid-table, but comfortably clear of relegation. Maybe even pushing for like a Europa Conference spot at the end of the season. But I do think their limitations in possession are probably going to cost them when they're trying to, get results at home to Burnley, for example.
And before we move to Premier League picks, can Conte Gunnar Solskjaer look at this result and maybe try and engineer a win against Manchester City?
I don't think Ole Gunnar Solskjaer needs to look at the Crystal Palace game. I think he just needs to look at his own prior work in games against
he has good
Manchester
results.
City.
Because
he knows how to play reactively on the break and pinch a win against Guardiola. Unfortunately, that might involve some team selection decisions that he's not influential enough to swing. So we might see this 3-5-2 again with Ronaldo and Cavani, and I don't think that attacking duo is really going to scare City in transition. It'll be interesting to see. it's very funny that he's gone to replicate the Conte system while Conte is linked with his job. That's just
Sometimes you just got to show that I can do it that way too.
showing another string to his bow. Apparently, the players were only told about the formation shift like 2 days before the game. So, yeah, I think the Tottenham win is a bit of a red herring. Tottenham aren't playing that well themselves, and I think United are capable of setting up effectively against City, but I just don't think they will.
Look, when Ronaldo did the Ronaldo chop and passed it to Cavani, it rewinded me back to 2008, and I loved it for that moment. But I think you're right. It's not a reflection of how we were going to compete at that higher level.